your host along with Ms. Ria today. Welcome to day 5 of this webinar series organized by the Resource Provider Wing of the Comdeal Trust for you all to understand our kits and manuals used for intervention. Our Communicaids are being widely used across India by both professionals and parents. And the presentations today will be on proto-vocabulary book and social stories to make you all understand its purpose and effectiveness in therapy. Before we begin, I would like to give you a few reminders. So all participants' mics will be muted during presentations and will be unmuted only during question and answers round. Kindly mute your videos for better audio quality, and we'll be taking up certain number of questions at the end of each presentation. To save your questions for then, you may leave your questions in the chat box or can directly clarify them with the speaker. Moving ahead to our first presentation of the day, that is Proto Vocabulary Book, we have Miss Nirupama Shrikant. Most of you know her by now, but I would like to give a brief about her again since many of you are new. Miss Nirupama Shrikant has been working closely with Dr. Karant over the last 17 years. She has worked as clinical coordinator for the clinical programs running at Comdeal head office until 2014. She is a master trainer of the Comdeal Trust. She is currently working as consultant for the Comdeal EI program at CARE ADD Unit, St. John's Research Institute, Bangalore. She'll be continued to be held in high esteem by parents and colleagues for her gentle but firm demeanor and professionalism. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So, should I start?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. So, hello everyone. Good afternoon. I'll be making two presentations today. My first presentation is on the Proto Vocabulary book. This book, this kit, the Proto Vocabulary kit rather, was released in the year 2007. So you have, we've just had a little display of what it is. So you have a little manual, as you can see in the slides, and you have a proto vocabulary book that has several sections to it, within it. And you also have the proto verb book, okay? Yeah. So before we actually go on, I'd like to talk a little bit about, just a minute, please. Yeah. I'd like to talk a little about what do we understand about proto-vocabulary. And I think it's important for us as early interventionists to understand it well, because there can be a little confusion when we think about proto-vocabulary of a child. So proto-vocabulary is basically, we're referring to a basic sound or sounds that precedes the production of a word or words. And this could be common for a set of words. For example, the sound ka is a proto for the words car, cup, come, carrot, etc. Or it could just mean ka for, the child could be using ka for just car. And these sounds are then further modified and shaped into a meaningful word. So what we will be talking to you about is not a picture vocabulary book. And I've put it up in my first slide because I think this is a point that we must remember all through during this first presentation. So proto-vocabulary emerges early in typically growing children, and it's between the ages 1 to 2 years, and sometimes it can also be between 12 to 18 months, so 1 to 1.5 years. And the proto-vocabulary will include, nouns. It may include just common nouns, or it could include proper nouns like daddy. I mean, of course, not the word daddy, but something for daddy like da. It could include verbs. It could include social words like no and bye-bye. And why is this an important step in language development? That's because the child at this point is now beginning to show recognition between sounds and meaning. So that's when he starts to establish the two. Between 1 to 2 years, 1 to 1.5 years, this connection starts to happen. So the response of the adult to the meaning of these productions that a child is making and the gradual shaping of that word will actually lead to the accurate speech production and mastery of the adult form of word. So in a way, the child is actually playing with a particular word. He's trying to approximate towards the true word. So the response to those proto words of that child, response of the adult to that word, to that production is important, and it's even more important when we respond to the proto words of a child with delay. And why do we say that? And I've actually put it in bold, for a child with delay. Why do we say that this is important? Is because for a child who has speech delay and he begins to make attempts at proto words, they won't receive the same attention or the same response from an adult, because this proto word itself gets delayed. So this is something, as I said, it emerges as early as 1 to 1.5 or 1 to 2 years. So for our children who have delay, if he's trying to come out with a proto word at 2.5, we often see it as being immature or infantile, or we just tend to ignore it, and we think that this is not what he should be saying, and we'd rather focus on the accurate production. But we must remember that this is how the child is developing. This is in typical and normal speech language development. This is the course that a child takes for a child who has no delay, and it's the same path that this child with delay is following. Hence, we must respond to the proto words for a child with delay with a lot more attention and support, and he should get that from all the adults around him. So certainly we really mustn't ignore it or consider it to be immature, because he's attempting to produce a true word, but he's using a proto word at this point. So the proto vocabulary book will be a collection of pictures and words, and we're looking at the record of the child's speech development. And when we add meaning to it, we're shaping the child's utterance by adding meaning to it. So this book has to be child specific. It can't be the same for every child that you are seeing. That's why I said that please remember that this is not a picture vocabulary book. And this proto-vocabulary book will actually document the child's current sounds and words. So what is he saying right now? So the proto-word itself could undergo some kind of transformation as you're working with the child before the child actually approximates or is able to produce the true word. And we've also seen that it's very useful with children who have a tendency to lose sounds or words they had produced earlier. So you often hear this when you're taking history, and parents say that, he used to say this word and he doesn't say it anymore. So perhaps that's when we said that you have to, so for a child with delay is also capable of producing proto words, and what did I say? I also said that it's the response of the adult that will shape it further. So if there is no response from the adult to shape that proto word, the child will lose it. I mean, there's no way that he doesn't feel reinforced to use it, and there is no motivation for that child to use it, and hence he will tend to lose those sounds. So if you work with proto words in the way that we are going to be talking about, it will be really useful to children who have perhaps lost those sounds or words that they had produced earlier. So what are the contents of this kit? It comes with a simple instruction manual that I have here, and there are 2 books, as I said. There's book 1, which has 8 categories. So we have a family. We've actually divided into 8 categories: family, eatables, toys, common items, animals, vehicles, body parts, and sounds. And the second one is the verb book, which is a little, it's got less number of pages because we really we can't really categorize the verbs. And each sheet over here, if you see, there are boxes for the pictures, and there's space for writing the proto word below. Okay. So what are we doing with this is that it kind of, with this Communicate, it's like a skeletal framework that we are providing to parents. And so it's easier then for early interventionists to guide parents and assist them in building further their child's expressive language skills. Otherwise, it is one of, as we've understood now, over the past few webinars, that the expressive language is the last to come about in a child. And since it is quite an hazy picture at times, this kind of documents the whole thing, and we're really zeroing down on the sounds that the child can produce or is producing at that point. So this framework makes it much more organized, and parents actually see how their child's expressive language is moving further. So what's important is, how do you prepare this book? So the first things that we often ask our parents to do, and if I'm looking at how do we introduce also the Proto Vocabulary book, for all of you who have been attending the entire webinar series, we said that in the initial months, we just work on the prerequisite learning skills. We don't even look at expressive language. But around the 4th or the 5th month of the child being into the intervention program, the 4th month, we ask parents to list out the sounds and words the child is producing. And now this again is guided by what the child's interests are, and because that will be the sounds he's producing, and whether he's using one sound for many words, or if it's just one sound for one word. And it could also be that he's using a sound in 2 different languages. So it could be pa, which could be papa in Hindi, and it could be park in English. He may be using that one sound based on the context. The child may be using that sound in different contexts. So that's how you will list out and choose the words, list out the words, and you'll choose words under certain guidelines. So these are the guidelines. You're going by the child's interest, and you'll have to closely listen to the child, ask the parent rather to closely listen to the child, and you'll see whether he's using one sound for many words, or one sound for just one word, and whether it's in 2 different languages. And then we've also given you some suggestions for choosing pictures, where we are saying that now, like I said, if the car sound is for car, so when you choose a picture, that should have just the car picture in focus, the picture that you've taken. And you could probably either use a very clear picture that you've clicked of your own car, or a car that the child likes. And there should be minimal distractions, and we'd say very realistic looking pictures. And preferably in the initial stages, at least, use colorful pictures. And at the bottom, you have to update the word as the child's proto word may. As you're shaping the proto word, and as the child shapes his own proto word, you'll have to update the word written at the bottom. So getting your book ready is as simple as collecting the pictures and pasting them. And it's better, suppose you have in family, there are 2-3 words, I'd say use a single. So if there are 2-3 words for family, for ma and appa and amma, don't put them together on the same page. Use it on separate pages. Similarly, the verb book, again, you have to list out sounds along with the parent, those which you feel can be shaped into meaningful words, and then paste pictures of the verbs that the child says. And here you have 5 sheets, and you can put either 2 pictures per page or 4 pictures per page. So using the book, it begins with pasting of pictures. Of course, and sometimes if your child is older, you can always also do it as a task with your child, and it could be probably a skill that your occupational therapist or your physical therapist is asked to work on with the child's fine motor skills. So you could involve the child in pasting the pictures. Ensure that there's comfortable seating and the book is very well visible to the child. I'm so sorry. Yeah. And so it should be very casual pointing, and you should accept any response that comes out from the child. Do not insist or demand a response from the child. And along with the pictures that you have pasted in your proto vocab book, you could use a real object. So I think there's a lot of confusion as to how you must use the book. So I have some pictures here, which you can see, where a child, if you look at the one on the left, the child would say sh for fish. So what you would do is you just pick up the book and say shh. Oh, Akash means fish. Akash is talking about the fish. And so what you're doing is the child, or if the child says shh at any other point, you're going to be modeling the correct word for him. But at this point, you're not asking him to touch fish, show me fish, because he's already using. Please remember, at this point we are not teaching them picture identification. We're not trying to improve their receptive language skills of identifying fish among a picture amongst two pictures and four pictures, or the function of it, which it's always easy to shift from that, from what the proto vocabulary is meant, into a receptive language task. So you don't need to do any of that. You're just casually pointing to it. You say initially, if the child may not even want to say it in front of you, because they get undue attention the moment they say a word, and sometimes children shy away from that. So when you're sitting with that child and with that book, you just casually point and you talk about the sound that he's saying and what this word is actually, the word actually should be, the way it should be said. And if at other points when you hear him, you say, oh, you're talking about fish. So I think the advice that I often give my colleagues when we're working with the proto-vocabulary book or with parents, I'd say we must think about how does the proto-vocabulary develop in a child who has no delay. And you just have to use the same principles. So you just have to think of how you would have interacted with a niece or a nephew who has no delay. And that's how you will, the same techniques you have to apply for this child with delay. So instead of producing these proto words when he was 1.5, he's just producing it when he's 2.5 or 3. And that's, so the method that you used with your niece or nephew in shaping those proto words, and then, he went on to producing the true words, it's a tried tested method. And the same thing can be, you can just transfer the same techniques into using with a child who has a delay. So here how it is. So what you do is, if you can see so here for the brush, we've written E. So he's using the sound there for, the brush. And then what you can do is, you at a point, he may start saying burr. So this E, we've provided you with little small stickers where you'll write burr. So he's shaping the E into a burr. And then you write burr and you paste it on the E. So this is how you would use those little labels. And as the child shapes that proto words, you'll be changing what you'll be writing at the bottom of that picture. Similarly, for co, he may start using comb at some point. So you'll have to really pay careful attention to what the child is saying and change the written form of the word, and do it along with the child, because we really mustn't underestimate how much the child who does not speak, but how much he is already able to hear and understand. So he's very much tuned into the environment, and we shouldn't use his level of expressive language, to decide how much he understands, because they understand a lot more than we think they are understanding. And I think when we spoke about the AAC, we understood that really well. So this, I just want to repeat that it's a wonderful tool, as long as you don't start a wonderful kit, as long as you don't start using it as a picture vocabulary book and just use it to build that can be a separate thing. Here, the basic rule is you're going by what the child produces, the sounds that he is producing, and the child's interests, and you're shaping his sounds into a true word. And it's not what you are saying, it's what the child. So it's entirely the child's book. So I've shared the link, and by now all of you know where you can procure it. So it's a very useful tool, and if you have kind of understood how well to use it, you can guide your parents with using this. So any questions? So I'd be happy to take them.
Yes, before we move on to the next presentation, if any of you have any questions with respect to the PV book, we'll take those up now. Yes, so a very common question, and I think most of us as therapists or parents would probably have this doubt about how it is different from a scrapbook, from a usual scrapbook or a naming book.
Yeah, so like I already mentioned, so in the naming book, you're going to be a scrapbook or a naming book. You're going to look at categories. You're looking at building on the child's semantics, and you're looking at building his vocabulary. So you're going to cover, so at that age, so if a 3-year-old child, what should the child's vocabulary be? That's what you would look at. And so you wouldn't be really going by the child's interest. You'd be going by more on your the skills or the objectives in your checklist. You'd be looking at it that way, but not but not with the PV book. So you wouldn't do that. You're listening, you're tuning into what the child is saying and what the sounds that he's producing out, and you're looking at consistency. Is he, using that sound consistently? And then once you've tuned into that, both as parents and therapists, then shift that those sounds into a PV book. If that explains it, and I don't know if I hope I've got that clearly, communicated.
Ma'am,
Yeah,
so the same question
I
is
don't know if this.
how would you do to a completely non-verbal child? How would we use the PV book?
Um, so that's so with a completely non-verbal child, I think initially using the PV book would be difficult, but maybe because you have to have some proto words with this. Perhaps you could start using it with a gesture that he is using, and every time you can probably modify it that way. So if he has a very not a refined gesture for a particular word, you could probably have that picture and you get him to look. You can probably do the gesture at that point. But otherwise, because you are basing this book on the child's proto words, and if he is completely non-verbal, then it would be like you're imposing that particular sound on that word, on that picture for the child. So you'll have to have some proto words from the child. Any other questions?
So, ma'am, in Proto PV book, when we are using, do we ask the questions like, what is this
No,
to increase
no, we don't.
productions?
No, you don't ask them questions.
It's,
Don't ask them questions.
it's basically how do we get them to increase productions, or
Yeah,
how do we give them more opportunities to kind of use the sounds that are there
yeah,
in their repertoire already, or how do we shape it into true words? So I think it's generally about how we give them opportunities.
yeah,
Do we ask them questions?
yeah. So because if you're going to ask them questions, and if you're going to draw attention to it, the child may often shy away. So you want to do it in as a very casual manner, and that's why I made a very valid point when I said that you need to think of how you would shape a typically growing child's proto words, and if you just use the same techniques, that should work.
Yes, ma'am.
So shall I share my next one?
Ma'am, there
Hello.
are a few more.
Just
Hello, ma'am.
yes, ma'am. There is a
Yeah,
Uh,
question.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Ma'am, I
yeah,
have a question.
yeah,
With a child with ASD having a lot of sensory issues, will
yeah.
this book be helpful, ma'am? How would you go about with this book, ma'am? With a lot of sensory issues, a child who is, having a tactile issue, and you know what I mean, ma'am. So,
Yeah, I
would this
really
book?
don't think that should come in the way, is what I'm thinking, because you would probably, he is having sensory issues, so you'd have to probably work very closely with the occupational therapist to understand how better can you make the book so that it doesn't become a distraction if he has a lot of tactile issues. So you'll have to do it, with the therapist. You'll have to work with your occupational therapist, is what I would think. Shilpa, would you feel that way? That's what I would usually do if any of our kids do have high sensory issues, and so I'd get actually it to start with my occupational therapist, even using the book, because the sensory issues, we'll have to work through with the sensory issues to build on his expressive language also. I mean, work with all of it together. That's how I see it. I don't know if Riya or Shilpa have anything else to say for
I
this.
think Dr. Karant, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I'd like to come in now because I
Yeah,
think, this issue of the proto vocabulary is not understood very clearly, even by speech therapists. What we need to understand is that in typical speech development, the babbling stage is when a child experiments with production of speech sounds. He just babbles the sounds that he's capable of producing. And initially, it is generally what we call the bilabials, that is, the sounds that are produced with the use of both the lips, ba, pa, ma. So even in speech sound production, there is a hierarchy over the first few years of life when the child gets mastery over the control of the articulators, the fine movements that are involved in speech production across a period of time, across a few years. It doesn't happen at one go. And the initial stage is generally a set of vowels and the bilabials. And then from there, the child starts moving. But the understanding of speech sound development in children is that they are producing sounds not intentionally, but those around him respond to it with joy. It is not accidental that the words for mother and father across languages in the world consists of either ba, ma, pa, and a. It is amma, ma, mama, papa. So this is not accidental that, this is how speech productions evolve. And then with the right reinforcement from those around him, even when the child doesn't intend a particular meaning, the child's words get shaped. So this is the principle for using proto-vocabulary development in the speech of a child who is delayed in speech production by encouraging him to start at, who he of course starts at a later date. But as Nirupama rightly pointed out, when an older child produces babbling, we don't respond to that. There is no joy among the adults because we are only looking at how he is not up to his age level, how he is well below his age level. We don't have a mental picture of a 6-month-old child or a 9-month-old child or a 1-year child. But this child also needs to go through those phases. Only when he masters the bilabials can he go on to the labial sounds or the other speech sounds. So that practice is important. And you can get him to use it in his natural development only by responding to it with acknowledgement of the meaning that he's trying to convey. So what we're doing in helping a family with the proto-vocabulary is by recording it, we are sensitizing the family also to the fact that this syllable production is used as a token by the child. He's consistently using it to refer to some things in his environment, but the adults fail to respond to that. And when you do it like that, you will see that the child has consistently started producing some syllables. The next step would be you can then combine those syllables into bigger words. Okay, and you will see him producing even more newer consonants and vowels and combinations. So it guides the therapist as to what are the kinds of words he will be able to produce. If he can produce bilabials, nasals, whatever, you can choose words which consist of those sounds. So this approach is very different from methods like the oral placement therapy, which get the child to do placement. The same articulatory production is done by getting the child to place the articulators in a particular configuration. The reason why we don't do that with our children is because increasingly it is acknowledged that they have genuine difficulty with motor production, and speech is one of the most complex fine motor production. So we don't, when a child has apraxia, you can drill him if you're using the behavioral approach. Our approach in ComDeal is elicitation within natural environments and supporting the child's growth in the natural environment. And as children naturally learn language. So this is why the proto-vocabulary was developed, so that we have a record of how the speech sounds that a particular child is producing start developing, help the child to reinforce him by using it in his environment, build more complex words, and that, get him onto the right path. I hope that clarifies a lot of the questions,
in the
that
chat
are
box.
being asked about why is it different from a scrapbook or a picture vocabulary book. The focus here is on speech sound production and supporting that without necessarily focusing on speech sound production. I hope I have clarified the main contention of why we use this.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. I think that has addressed a lot of the questions in the chat box. Dr. Lakshmi Venkatesh, would you like to come in and share your experiences with us?
Ria, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, as I
Ma'am, your voice is
said,
breaking, ma'am.
I've used not suspected autism, but just suspected with suspectedly late talkers, just late talkers with suspected childhood apraxia of speech between 2 and 4 years, and I've found it useful for just understanding the sound repertoire of the children and the syllable structures used by children. Parents find it very easy to document it systematically in the proto vocabulary book. It helps them to document it and understand, also the clinician to understand the syllable structures used by the child. And we can select targets then based on the sounds that the child can produce and the syllable structure that the child can produce. So either we can expand new sounds in the same structure that the child produces, or introduce new sounds. So I think just as how Kanant ma'am explained, it really helps in selection of it has helped me in and parents to select and appreciate the repertoire and increase the repertoire of the child. And also, also to make help them actually understand the meaning of the, attach a meaning to the word also, sounds also, but more from a speech production perspective is what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
There's one more question, ma'am. Is PV book approach similar to prompt?
So I think it's a little different from prompt because, like we said, you're not looking at any tactile or kinesthetic feedback that you're giving to the child. So you're so like ma'am said, we're looking rather more at just eliciting the response from the child in a natural context. So you're not, if I understand that, you're not giving feedback to the child on what he is producing, but you're just shaping his word further. Dr. Karant, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think that is it. See, I think the basic difference is in all of the other speech sound production techniques, there is a focus on the child doing a motor movement, okay, simple to complex, depending on the sound that you want him to produce. Given that the children have difficulty in producing sounds, not because of a basic motor issue, but again, maybe I'll delve into this a little more. An apraxia, by definition, is a motor action which is difficult to produce on demand. The involuntary voluntary contrast is extremely important in understanding apraxia. So, and I've seen this in adults, and I've seen the great difference when a person does it voluntarily on his own and how he freezes. And I'm talking about an adult. He freezes when you demand this. Now, with children with autism spectrum disorders, the literature is replete with stories about how when he wants to do it, he will do it, and he's doing it very well. But when you ask him to do it, he doesn't do it. And the interpretation is that he doesn't do it because he does not want to do it. In an apraxia, what happens is, it is not that he's not doing it because he does not want to do it, but he has genuine difficulty in doing it when you ask him to do it. So in using the natural elicitation response without, focusing on placement or other kind of tactile cues or prompting the child even, what we are trying to do is we are eliciting the speech sounds that we know that the child is already producing in order to build the confidence of the child in speech production and taking him forward. And yes, in the last presentation, there's another question about nonverbal children here. In the last presentation, I think Tanushri illustrated how well this can take place, but it needs patience, it needs trust, and it needs time. Unlike the placement therapies where you drill with a very focused manner. But once you do it, then the child's confidence builds up, and irrespective of situation, he will produce it increasingly, as Lakshmi Venkatesh pointed out. I hope that answers it.
Thank you,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am. Thank you,
Just
ma'am.
one last question, ma'am. How does this support bilinguals? I mean,
Okay.
vocabulary.
This is a question again which is emerging more and more. And again, I'm talking with the keeping in mind children with autism spectrum disorders. Actually, bilingualism doesn't per se affect speech production, except when the two languages are very different, and if the child is learning the second language, post puberty, it is difficult to perceive and produce speech sounds which are not existent in the first language, because we lose the flexibility of both perception and production. Okay, but if it's in the early learning period, children who are bi as well as multilinguals do learn accurate speech perception and speech production for each of their languages. And that is also true of a child with autism spectrum disorders. He doesn't have a special difficulty just because two languages are being spoken in his environment. If we use the same principles, a child, an ASD child in a bilingual environment, when you start this early enough, he is as capable of learning the two systems as you and I are.
Thank you, ma'am. Shilpa?
Yes, moving on to our next presentation of the day, I would like Nirupama ma'am to start with the social stories.
Sorry about this. Yeah. Is it? Yeah. It's. I've shared my screen, right? Yeah. So the second part of this webinar, is about social stories. So Communicaids has released the following social stories. We have 4 sets right now. Stories for Everyday Social Skills Set 1, released in 2007, where we are looking at skills like greeting, waiting and sharing. And the second one, released in 2009, is with toileting, nail cutting and hair cutting. In 2017, we released the car and scooter ride social story. And in 2017, again, we also released the sleep book. Once therapists and parents grasped how social stories work, we'd encourage that they can create their own social stories based on the child's needs. We've chosen these, we found that these were again social stories that we created out of the needs that parents shared with us and concerns that they shared with us. And we often found that our therapists would be constantly creating little stories for each child and each family. And we found that there were certain things that were common, amongst all the children. So we've kind of tried to make it with a few options that are given to parents in terms of the reactions or how the child is facing difficulty with that particular situation. And that's how these stories have been framed. So as we all know that children with communication disorders and ASD have difficulty in managing routine everyday social skills. And so much that these difficulties interfere in their social development and peer interaction, in adjustment, in accommodation with others. And it's very well documented that we can help our children acquire these skills. So a social story, as we all know, is just a simple description of an everyday social situation. And most importantly, it's written from the child's point of view as to what is challenging for him and what are the difficulties that he has, and then trying to get him to see what is the viewpoints of others if he is able to change that behavior around. So the emphasis is on social cues and appropriate behavior. And it's, as we all most of us are familiar, and we have already in our clinical practices, we have used social stories. So there are a whole lot of visual illustrations that help children understand and relate better to what we are trying to focus on that behavior, the behavior which is challenging for both the child as well as the parent. And it can be individualized to incorporate specific needs of the child. So what we do is that we read the story many times over, and eventually the child will learn to grasp the concept, of the idea behind it. So these stories will help the child prepare for changes, help them deal with a range of situations that are challenging for the child. The set 1 and 2 that I mentioned in my second slide. So there are 2 sets. The first one is it has little stories on greeting, waiting, and sharing. And the second one is on toileting, hair cutting, and nail cutting. So each of these sets have 3 booklets and a manual. And what we recommend that parents select situations as per the child's need at that point. So you begin with the story that addresses the most challenging behavior for them, and you focus on one behavior at a time. So a child could have challenges in greeting and sharing, but you have to look at what you think is more important. I mean, if sharing has become a bigger issue in the school setting or in his therapy setting, then you'd rather go with the sharing social story. If the hair cutting is a major issue, then you'd go with that first. We recommend that parents start with that story first. Important points about how one can use the social story. Here again, the child is expected to only listen to the story. So we're not expecting active participation. We're not asking any questions. We're not making demands. We're not giving him a choice when we're reading that sentence and saying, would you do this? Would you do that? Is this good? Is this bad? You don't make any questions or demands while you are reading out the story. We recommend that you read the story twice a day or once a day. It depends on how the child reacts, how the child's reaction to the story. Depending on that, you can read it once or twice a day, and all days in a week. And each session would hardly be for 2 to 3 minutes. And we also recommend that the same parent or caregiver should read the story to the child through the week. So choose a time where there are minimal distractions. Otherwise, you're battling too many things at the same time. Ensure that the child is calm and comfortable, and the position of the book becomes important. We often say when we're saying that we want, when we say read the child, it should sound like chocolate or something that the child is fond of, and not something that he doesn't want to do. So the position of the book, ensuring he's calm, comfortable, and he's also, and you though he may not respond to you, that he's listening, you know that the child is listening to you. There are a few sentences in the first 2 sets. We've left a few sentences incomplete, such as Dash is happy. So that depends on, if he greets somebody, he would realize that who is most happy, if his friend is happy or Amma is happy. So you can customize the book as per the child's needs. And in set 2, which is, which has social stories for toileting, hair cutting, and nail cutting, there are a few gentle tips that have been given, which you again can, work on this along with your occupational therapist. The other 2 social stories that I'll briefly talk to you all about is the scooter car ride. We do know that traveling by scooter and car is often difficult when it is just the child and the parent. So preparing the child for the ride with detailed explanations is a tested method to help ease the ride. And you can use this book, this social story, as a guide to talk to your child and prepare him for the ride. So the challenges of traveling by scooter or car could be, it could be with the route, it could be the rules of travel safety. So, at the waiting, the child may just want to, how should he sit on the scooter, and how should he hold his mother, or even wearing the helmet. It could be waiting at the signal, because if a child is restless, if you're on the scooter, he may want to get off. Or adjusting to a change of routine. If there's a sudden road blockage, you'll have to change the routine, and the child clings on to that particular route the route, adjusting to change of route. So the child clings on to that route, and for some reason you have to change that route. that's one of the challenge that many parents have spoken to us about. So considering these challenges that parents shared with us, and this is how this book came about. So at the end of this, I do have some of the sentences, that we've incorporated in this social story, and we've kind of worked it around with what challenges the families have shared with us, and so those are the sentences that we have incorporated in this social story. Coming to the sleep book, the reason we felt that we need to bring about a social story on sleep is that it's very important that we streamline a child's physiological needs. So his food, his water, his sleep very early. Because if a child is not sleeping well, if a child is hungry, he's, it's likely that there's a very high chance that he's going to be cranky and he won't be able to participate in the interventions or in any of his other classes that he may be going for, or in a play school if he's already into a supportive school environment. And we're all aware that children with ASD have a variety of sleep challenges. So parents often, we've seen that they coordinate with a therapist to streamline the sleep issues. And we know that there are several reasons that contribute to the sleep challenges. So you work closely with your occupational therapist who will analyze and draw out a plan. If you need to make a referral to a child psychiatrist at any point, you also go ahead and do that. But you've done all of that, and once you've understood the reasons as to why the child may be having sleep issues, then this book becomes a valuable aid to further build the process. And so what this book does is, like our other social stories, it provides an outline to help you explain to the child about the importance of sleep. And it's certainly not a solution to the sleep issues, but whatever efforts are being put in by the team and the parent, it supplements it. So that how, if he doesn't sleep too well, how it disturbs his papa and how it disturbs his mama, and how it may disturb him also. And when he sleeps well, what is the consequence of that? All of that has been given in a very simple, from the child's viewpoint, and how best you can communicate that to the child. So these are some of the sample pictures that are, we've picked out a few samples. So the first one is about, when he's cut his nails. So, or when he does susu in his pants, or when he doesn't cut his hair, how the hair looks. So we've got these pictures. You could always personalize it with real pictures of the child. And these are some of the samples of the other two books that I spoke to you about, the scooter car ride and also the sleep book. So we both, like when the signal is red, our mom has to stop the scooter. So we wait for the signal to go green and we start our ride again. Or, when you stop at the petrol bunk to fill petrol, how the child has to wait patiently, because probably that was not being done every day. And so one day that, mother does, it has to stop. So these are the kind of sentences that we have incorporated. But we'd encourage, once you get used to how to make a social story, we ask parents to work closely with their therapist, or the team itself can kind of sit together and create a social story along with the parent for the child. So these are the links to all the 4 sets, and we found that it's very useful. And there will be several issues, and we've just covered some of them, but there'll be several other issues. And once you're just reading out the story, and over time the child does begin to understand. It's important that the sentences are written from the child's perspective, use simple language, and you directly address the issue and that you are facing. And having real pictures helps even more. So if there's any questions on this, I'd be happy to answer them.
You all can unmute yourself, and if there are any questions on social stories, please do ask.
Can I come in and just, add a little more to what Nirupama has spoken about?
Sure, ma'am.
Social stories have been used in the West for quite a while. And there are, you can Google it, you will find tutorials, instructions as to what kind of language should be used in social stories. One of the main premises is that you should never address a child directly, in the sense that saying, if you want him to eventually get his hair cut, you don't end up saying, look, he has done it, now you do it. So there is no direct instruction to the child. Okay, most of us, all of us, don't like to be told all the time. And particularly children, again, with issues such as those with autism spectrum disorders, you must remember, have a lot of things told to them, and they have a genuine difficulty in responding to those. So there are principles which guide you in preparing a social story, and particularly the language that you use. So you don't use direct language, you use indirect language. You hold somebody else as an example, and the child learns by inference rather than being told. And that works much better with these kids than being told how to be a good boy, or you have to be a good boy, you have to do this, only then you're a good boy, otherwise you're a bad boy. Those kinds of direct comments addressed to a particular child at a particular time. And one does see these changes come about in the child's behavior when you use this indirect method of holding somebody else as an example and showing how they coped with a particular difficulty. And then the child absorbs it and internalizes it.
Thank you, ma'am. Are there any questions?
I'd also like to just add a little more about the recordings. We will not be sharing recordings individually. Once we finish the series of webinars, it will be loaded onto our websites. And anyone who wants to listen to them can visit the website and listen to them.
Okay, I think there are no further questions. So,
Shilpa, 1 second,
yes,
please. I
yes,
see a comment there saying that, are you planning to hold more such sessions? We are open to doing it, provided you tell us what you would like us to elaborate on. Are there particular topics? Are there queries? So you send in your suggestions. We would like this to be a two-way process. So you send us your suggestions, and if you want us to organize more such webinars, we are happy to do it. At the end of the series, Shilpa will be talking about the training programs that we conduct. We are very open to dialogues with people. So do let us know what you are interested in, and we will respond to it.
thank you, ma'am. And also, I would like to tell all of you that we'll be addressing all pending questions posted by some of you during our last day of webinar series or the very next day, that is on 20th. So I request all of you to indicate whether you would like all your pending questions to be addressed on the last day of our webinar, which is on 19th, or you would like it to be addressed on a separate day. So I request all of you should participate in that, and do email us to proceed further on this. Thank you all for your participation, and we look forward to see all of you in our next webinar, which is on Friday, 14th of August. Thank you.
Shilpa, there's a question on introducing visuals and feeding. So maybe you
Yeah,
can take that into account when you make your presentation.
sure, ma'am.
Visuals, we can deal with it at the last session, but feeding, maybe you can include it in your presentation.
Yes, ma'am.
Shilpa,
Yes, ma'am.
may I leave for the meeting?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, sure, ma'am. Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
because I
Yeah,
have to attend something else in another
sure,
five
sure, sure.
minutes. Is
Yes,
that
ma'am.
it takes time for me to open that app? That's why.
No
Okay, thank you
problem.
so
Thank
much.
you. Yeah.
Thank you,
Bye,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Thank you
Thank
so much.
you.
Bye.
Bye, ma'am.
Bye.
Ria,
Yeah,
just stop the recording, no? I'm not able to.
sure. One second. Oh, I can't either.